Hey, what's up? It's Phoenix and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to do a tour of my two bookshelves and I'm very excited to do this, so without further ado, let's dive right in. Now, as you can tell, I ran out of room, and so I have books in front of books and books at the top, which I can go over. But first, let's start with the first section. And I want to preface by saying that I am really proud of my books and the books that I've collected throughout the years, and I'm very excited that I have been able to read these books through time, as they've been very, very influential on me. And the best way to describe the bookshelf is cataloged, I would describe as chronological. So right here, in this little brief section, we have the Ancients, and it includes both texts from the East and the West. So right there you can see the Bhagavad Gita, Confucius, Analects, Suma Chin, the Book of Chuang Tzu, all of which are Eastern texts, both Chinese and Indian. But you also get Aesop's Fables and the 13 Books of the Elements, which is by Euclid, which is his geometrical system. You also see Epicurus there as well, Epicurus and the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius. And so that's really cool to have. While in the back, I have some other books, such as by Lao Tzu. I have a copy of the Quran, I have Buddhist scriptures, I have Heraclitus and Plato, and Homer as well, Sextus Empiricus. So it's very exciting to be able to collect some of these texts from the ancient world. It's definitely a different world from then as it is now, and that's why I find a lot of wisdom in the things that they describe. Now the next little section is the Middle Ages, and that includes texts like Dante, who's in the back, so that includes Dante's Vita Nuova, as well as his Divine Comedy, of course. I also have Chaucer in the back, which you can't quite see, but that's okay. I have medieval philosophy, and a lot of the Middle Age texts focus on many books ranging from the Iceland saga. So right here you see the, I can never pronounce it, but that saga. And then I have plenty of texts from what you could describe from the lore of King Arthur. I actually took a class in school of texts from the Middle Ages, and some of the texts that I read there includes these texts, including Romance of the Rose and also the Arthurian legends. And I'm very excited to possess these books. They definitely keep me very excited, as I will acknowledge, and I have definitely enjoyed specifically Boccaccio's The Decameron, which was a complicated book, but I read through the entire thing, and it was definitely worth it. Now moving a little bit down here, we have the Renaissance, which includes Rabelais, who is not always mentioned in kind of surveys of world literature and Renaissance literature, but Rabelais actually influenced my book. He influenced my book Contorted Royal with his humor and satire. We have some Shakespeare back here, as you can tell from the emblem right there. And we definitely have books by Edmund Spenser. I'm a big fan of Edmund Spenser, I will acknowledge that. And a big fan of Montaigne as well, and his philosophy, and some of these other philosophers and poets that I've read throughout the ages. Next we have what I would describe as the early modern period, roughly the 1600s through the 1700s. And you get, as an example, the English poems of George Herbert. You get the Leviathan, so definitely some philosophical texts. You get Rousseau, and you get Hume, who is a little bit in the back. Some less familiar texts, such as colonial American writing, which you can see right there. And I definitely have a lot of Milton, because Milton has been very influential in terms of poetry in the West, and he's been very influential in terms of how we think about culture. And so I very much like that. The next little bit is one of my favorite sections in world literature, which is the Romantic period. So as you can see, we have Byron, Thoreau, Wordsworth, and many different poets and philosophers and writers. And one of my favorites is actually Gerard de Nerval, which you can see about right here. And I have some of his writings, and that's always really cool. I have some older texts, such as this old library edition that you can see of Schiller and Schiller's works. And I have Goethe, of course, because Goethe is one of the giants of world literature. And I also include some Romantic philosophy, such as Hegel. Hegel is definitely a good one to include. I also have Edgar Allan Poe and some other poets. I'm very glad that I was able to get this edition of William Cullen Bryant's poems, and I love that edition, and I think it's really cool. Next, we start with the texts of the 19th century, which includes Chekhov, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass, Dracula, Matthew Arnold, Treasure Island, some Tolstoy, and this is barely the beginning, because I literally have a whole other row dedicated to the 19th century, which includes Victorian texts, but also texts from the 19th century. And I really, really like it. I like that I have been able to read Tolstoy throughout the ages, who is a complicated writer and requires a lot of, I think, attention that you have to pay attention to, and a lot that you need to pay attention to. But I have a variety of texts, and many of them are hidden, as you can see, as they are on most of my bookshelves, but there is a basic understanding of the kind of world literature I've read. There's Moby Dick, and that book has highly influenced me throughout the brief period, or the brief interim I would describe of which I've read him, which was probably about last year. And I definitely enjoy Moby Dick and the book. And yeah, so it's a lot of fun. You get Whitman, Mark Twain, Uncle Tom's Cabin, you get works by John Stuart Mill, and then in the back you get texts by Charles Dickens and Dostoevsky, of course, and so you definitely get a lot. And yeah, so then the final little bit in this section would be the modernist period. And the modernist period has definitely influenced me a lot, particularly when I think of writers like Joyce, who has influenced me a ton. So there you can see James Joyce, and that's only one of the books I have by him. But you can also see Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And so Joyce has definitely influenced me a lot. So has Friedrich Nietzsche and his philosophy and the various things that he's talked about. You can also see Joyce again with Ulysses. So it's definitely influenced me a lot. Some Franz Kafka, some William Faulkner, some Ezra Pound. And it's definitely a very magical thing. I really enjoy these books, and I enjoyed that I've been able to read them throughout the ages, and modernism has influenced me quite a bit because of the ways in which I think about writing and how writing can break all of the rules if you are willing to let it. So again, this is my bookshelf. Next, indeed, I would like to show you the rest of my bookshelves with my second bookshelf. And so, continuing along from beyond the modernists, we have the postmodernists, so to speak, as well as writers that fit roughly from the 1940s to contemporary times now. So you get writers from, including the Beats, such as Ferlinghetti and Kerouac. You get the influence of Foucault and Derrida. You get Richard Brautigan, and you get quite a bit of other writers. And so I have definitely been thinking a lot about writing from a more contemporary perspective, and while it is not my only perspective that I would acknowledge in the history of literature, I would acknowledge it as being influential for getting me to think about form, much in the way that modernists did. Of course, you have Beckett, who has influenced me more Foucault, and then Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco, some Burroughs, some Baudrillard. You definitely get a lot of things, Charles Bernstein, Jorge Luis Borges, language poets. You definitely get a lot here. Now, this next little bit, I will acknowledge, has influenced me in a different way, different from just looking at a history of literature, because these are books that I've just really enjoyed throughout the years that follow no specific literary style or movement specifically, but that I enjoy. Paperboy, as you can see there, was a very interesting book. The main character was very interesting in kind of a remarkable way, very unique character. Schizo by Nick Sheff has influenced me in terms of thinking about mental illness. You get some LGBT books, you get some books on some more mainstream books like Jodi Picoult and John Hart, and some other books that I have enjoyed throughout the ages. Canada by Richard Ford, and you get a lot of different things that I've read throughout the ages, and I really enjoy it. So yeah, you can see it from here. Barry Hines, Kestrel for a Knave has influenced me a lot, and I would say influenced my own character, Kess, who's from my street kid universe, so to speak. And then we have contemporary philosophy, I would describe. We have this book on logic right here, which you can tell is probably pretty dense, but definitely very interesting. and I definitely find it to be worthwhile. Roger Scruton's amazing book on modern philosophy, which I read through because it fascinated me so much. We get Cornel West, we get little surveys on philosophy, we get Isaiah Berlin. We definitely get a lot of different things in this section. Karl Popper, Chomsky, and Foucault, at least that dialogue, as you can see. Edward Said, Frantz Fanon, who has influenced post-colonial studies, and more histories of philosophy. Next, we have one of my favorite sections, which is fantasy and science fiction and speculative fiction. So, of course, we have George R.R. Martin. Those are his short story collections. We have Asimov, who is a household name. Neil Gaiman, who is a household name. Wells, Melville, Verne, China Miéville, I mean. And then Jules Verne, Ray Bradbury. So you definitely get a lot of interesting things. There's a Vonnegut edition of books, which includes, I believe, Breakfast of Champions and Slaughterhouse-Five, which were... I haven't read Breakfast of Champions, but I really like Slaughterhouse-Five. And then some little bit more mainstream books, such as by Dean Koontz and Stephen King, who's kind of buried away a little bit, but Stephen King has influenced me throughout the ages as well, so I have kept most of his books. And I enjoy this section for keeping my imagination fertile and keeping me thinking about all of the possibilities. And then finally, last but not least, we have my contemporary poetry section. I'll admit I'm not the biggest fan of the Outlaw Bible of American Poetry. I just don't find the poetry to be that interesting, but I should continue to give it a chance, because I'm sure it's fine. We also have Figures from the Undergrowth, which is an indie publication by a wonderful friend of mine, Donald Armfield, who writes very good poetry. And we have other contemporary books that I've managed to find throughout the years of poetry. We have some Muriel Rukeyser in the back, which is a little bit hidden. Czeslaw, I believe is his name. Anne Carson, and John Berryman. And you definitely see a lot of interesting texts. So yeah, this is a brief summary of my books and the things that I read. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoyed this discussion. And yeah. So, I appreciate your stopping by. There will be much more videos to come, and I will see you next time. This is Phoenix, and thank you.